Football is so important to so many people around the world. We dub it the beautiful game, and more often than not, it is just that. Jaw-dropping moments and last-minute winners are what dreams are made of, but every now and then, a darker side can be revealed. In the summer of 1969, a series of football matches between Honduras and El Salvador showed the very worst of humanity, igniting a conflict that claimed thousands of lives. Welcome to the 18-yard box. Today I am going to tell you the story of how the beautiful game triggered a war. The tension between Honduras and El Salvador was simmering well before their football matches even kicked off. These weren't just noisy neighbors with a friendly rivalry. These were two nations on the brink of war. It was a deep-rooted and complex relationship that was largely caused by the landmass and population of each nation. Honduras was blessed with 5 times the space as El Salvador, but with 1 million fewer people to house. This led many El Salvadorans to cross the border and settle in Honduras, taking agricultural work or simply squatting on the land and making it theirs. By 1969, there were 300,000 immigrants in Honduras, which wasn't exactly taken well by the locals. In response to the unrest in his country, Honduran President Oswaldo López Arellano blamed the El Salvadoran immigrants. He passed a new Land Reform Act in 1962, which was fully enforced in 1967, essentially taking all the land that was occupied by El Salvadoran immigrants and distributing it to Hondurans. As a result, huge numbers of El Salvadorans were displaced and sent back to their country, and many that remained were targeted with violence. They had been painted as the enemy by the government, and many of the local Hondurans were more than happy to view them that way. They were regularly attacked and had their properties targeted, with some even being murdered. When El Salvadorans complained to the Honduran government about the treatment of their people, the complaints fell on deaf ears. Tensions were at an all-time high, and both countries were at somewhat of a stalemate. Enter football. In some kind of sick twist of fate, it just so happened that the two teams were drawn against each other in the 1970 World Cup qualifiers. The winner would take one of the last remaining spots in the prestigious tournament and earn ultimate bragging rights, whereas the loser would wallow in anger and watch from the sidelines. To say there was a lot on the line would be an understatement. The first of the two-leg fixture was played at the Honduran capital of Tegucigalpa on June 8, 1969. Politicians pulled no punches in the media during the lead-up to the game, leading to even more hostility on the streets. On the night before the game, Honduran locals made their voices heard, rioting all night long to ensure the El Salvadoran players got the polar opposite of a good night's sleep. Perhaps it worked, because the home team managed to squeak out a 1-0 victory thanks to an 89th minute goal. Predictably, the away fans immediately began rioting and reportedly set fire to the stadium. There were even reports of an 18-year-old El Salvadoran girl, Emilia Bolanos, committing suicide after the game. By now, the media and key figures were widely encouraging violence, and the suicide provided them a perfect rallying call. Her death was plastered over the front pages, and her funeral was broadcast for everyone to see. The return fixture took place in San Salvador, the El Salvador capital, and yep, you guessed it, the Hondurans didn't get a good night's sleep either. Riots went on all night, resulting in several deaths. When game time did arrive, the home team dished out the ultimate insult by waving a dirty rag in place of the Honduran flag. The El Salvadoran team, perhaps benefiting from their unimpacted night's sleep, eased a 3-0 win. The reaction was yet more violence, including the murder of 2 Honduran fans. On the other side of the border, the Honduran government shipped more and more El Salvador immigrants out of their country, culminating in approximately 1,400 being misplaced a day. To cap off all the chaos, there was still one more football match to be played. With each team having won a game, a decider was played at a neutral venue in Mexico City on June 26th. El Salvador emerged victorious with a 3-2 victory, but the result was quickly lost to a much more serious issue. The tone was set before the game and started when, on the morning of the deciding game, El Salvador cut diplomatic ties with Honduras. Whilst many will point to the ensuing game as the cause of the war, It was that decision by the government that dictated what happened next. El Salvador broke off the diplomatic ties because they claimed the Honduran government had essentially committed genocide against their civilians. In doing so, the starting gun for war was fired, and both countries sprung to action. El Salvador brought in as many planes as they could, often having to settle for old, banged-up military planes or passenger jets that they could convert into some form of fighters. Honduras benefited from its own collection of warplanes, but any advantage they held was quickly lost. El Salvador beat them off the line and earned the first minor victory of the war, completing a bombing run on the Toncontin airport on July 14th, which was their Air Force hub. The bombs were dropped by hand out of the cargo hatch, which meant accuracy wasn't great. They missed their opponent's planes, but did temporarily take the runway out of action. Whilst this was taking place, El Salvador was also making great progress on the ground, working their way towards the Honduran capital. The Honduran Air Force soon got in the air though, and before you know it, it was a full-blown war, with both sides taking significant damage and exhausting resources. On July 18th, only 4 days after the commencement of the war, the Organization of American States managed to get both sides to agree to a ceasefire. Perhaps surprised by the force they had experienced from their neighbors, Honduras was quick to accept. But it took a few days before El Salvador finally agreed as well. In truth, despite getting off to a good start, they were exposed and running out of resources, which meant the ceasefire came at a good time for both parties. However, El Salvador's troops did stay in the country until August 2nd to ensure that their people living in Honduras remained safe. In total, the war lasted 100 hours, with varying reports of the number of deaths, ranging from 2,000 to many more. These are mostly thought to have been civilian deaths. The relationship between the two countries took a while to repair, with a proper peace agreement not being reached until over 10 years later. It's fair to say that things remained pretty difficult beyond that as well, confirming this as the most violent incident in footballing history. What do you think about the whole ordeal? And what historical footballing events would you like me to explore next? Let me know in the comments.